All right. Well, good evening and welcome to our seventh of 13 Fall into OBOB 2023 events. I'm Julie and I'm the events manager here at Roundabout Books in beautiful Bend, Oregon. So this event is being recorded. If you don't want to have your image out there on YouTube, we totally understand. Feel free to turn your video off, and then we just ask that you stay muted until it's time for Q&A. If you do think of a question while the author is speaking, please feel free to put it in the chat window, and that way you won't forget it and we won't forget it, and we'll talk about it at the time. So if you are so inclined, we'd love to hear in the chat where you're joining us from, either your city or your school, and how many times, or if this is your first year participating in Oregon Battle of the Books. As I said, this is our second year of doing OBOB events, so we're really hoping that everybody loves them as much as they did last year, and we can keep doing them for as long as people will continue to log into Zoom. One of the great things that maybe left over from such a horrible time as the pandemic is this opportunity to bring authors who are not local to us into our store and to readers all around the state of Oregon. So again, thank you for being here. Tonight's book is Stowaway by John David Anderson. So here's a little information about the book. The beloved author of Posted returns with the acclaimed first book in a coming-of-age sci-fi duology about Leo, a kid trying to navigate the galaxy in order to save his family and possibly the planet Earth. When scientists discover a rare and mysterious mineral buried in the Earth's crust, they have no idea that it just happens to be the most valuable substance in the entire universe. It's not long before aliens show up to our little corner of the galaxy, offering us a promise of protection, some fabulous new technology, and entry into their intergalactic coalition, all in exchange for this precious resource. A material so precious that other alien forces are willing to start a war over it, a war that soon makes its way to Earth. Leo knows this all too well. His mother was killed in one such attack, and soon after, his father, a coalition scientist, decides it would be best for them to leave Earth behind. It's on this expedition that their ship is attacked. Leo's father is kidnapped, and Leo and his brother are stranded in the middle of space. The only chance they have is for Leo to stow away on a strange ship of mercenary space pirates, bound for who knows where, and beg the captain to help him find his father. This is such a good adventure story already. But the road is dangerous, and pirates, of course, only look out for themselves. Leo must decide who to trust as he tries to stay alive and save his family, even as he comes to understand that there aren't many people, human or alien, that he can count on in this brave new universe. John David Anderson is the author of several beloved and best-selling books for kids, including the New York Times notable book, Miss Bigsby's Last Day, Posted, Granted, One Last Shot, and many more. A dedicated root beer connoisseur and chocolate fiend, he lives with his wonderful wife, 2 kids, and 2 new kittens in Indianapolis. And that is where he is joining us tonight. Dave, welcome so much to Roundabout Books and to our Fall into OBOB events. I want to turn it over to you to tell us much more about Stowaway, and that way we can get to some questions from our audience. So please take it away.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks to the 2 of you who decided to come join us. That's excellent. We appreciate the audience. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself from the start. My name is John David Anderson. Everybody calls me Dave. I'm from Indianapolis. It's true. Land of corn and basketball, apparently, and car racing. These are the things that we care about. I have been published since I was 30. I have been writing seriously since I was 17. I've been telling stories since I was 3, because that's when I started lying to my parents to try and get out of trouble. So if you got your story starting the same place I did, right? You were a mischievous kid and you're like, hey, if I can come up with a good enough reason, right, why I did what I just did, blame the cat or the dog or the vampires or the robots. Problem was I had this huge imagination, right? So all of my excuses were just like ridiculous and off the wall. But I knew that storytelling was this incredibly powerful force. And I knew that I wanted it to be a big part of my life ever since growing up. And then something really fun happened when I was 5 years old. My father took me to see my very first movie in the theater. This was 1980, and the movie was Empire Strikes Back. Right. Keeping in mind, I hadn't actually seen Star Wars: A New Hope yet. Right. So he's taking this movie because everybody's going to see this movie, and I'm 5 years old, so apparently I'm going to understand it. I had no idea what was going on. Right. But I knew it was awesome. There were like giant armored cats blowing things up. There was a dad cutting off his son's hand. I learned a lot about parenthood by watching Empire Strikes Back. I learned a lot about good and evil. People were getting frozen. Those little green guys talking backwards. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, how is it possible that one imagination created all this stuff? And so not only did my love of Star Wars sort of engender in me a love of storytelling, but it also created in me a love of science fiction. And I sort of kept that through not only in my movie watching and my television shows. Yeah, I mean, I have watched Star Trek too. Like, I'm still a Star Wars geek, but I don't discriminate. But in my reading, obviously, like, I was gorging myself on Isaac Asimov and Philip K. Dick and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. All these were books that I sort of fell in love with at about the same time when I was falling in love with writing. Fast forward, and I've got a few books under my belt. I've written about superheroes, and I've written about fairies, and I've written realistic fiction about teachers with cancer and other kids. And I thought to myself, like, what's one thing I haven't done yet? And all those memories of all those wonderful science fiction stories that I loved as a kid, they came flooding back to me. And I thought, well, it's time, right? It's time to pay homage to one of the things that I love the most. And that's kind of how Stowaway was born, right? It is born out of my passion and my love for the genre of science fiction and of itself. So I took just about, as you're reading this description, Julia, I'm like, oh man, did I try to cram a lot into this thing? There's like alien wars, and there's space pirates, and there's family issues and all this stuff. I tried to cram everything I loved about science fiction novels into this one duology. And you can obviously see elements of Star Wars in it, and there are definitely elements of Guardians of the Galaxy in it. But there's even elements of old terrible movies that I used to watch when I was a kid, right? Like Ice Pirates. There's a movie called Ice Pirates. It's awful. It's one of the worst movies ever made. But I loved it, and I watched it like 5 times in a row. And I was thinking about Ice Pirates as I was writing this book, because the things that we love, right, we want to share them with the world. And one way to share them is to take the bits and pieces of all the stories that we know and we love, and find ways to twist them and rearrange them, so that we can create something that at least seems new, even if it's probably not that new. I am a firm believer that there are only 10 stories that have ever been told in the world. And we just keep finding new ways to retell them. And I think that's true for science fiction. I'm not the first person to write about alien, races that are clashing over rare minerals. And I'm certainly not the first person to write about space pirates. But one of the things that I wanted to do was take all these science fiction stories and put them through the eyes of a middle grade protagonist, right? So Leo is 13 years old. He has an older brother. But he's at that point where he still believes everything that's been told to him. And I think, as kids and as tweens, that's where we're at. We've been, I don't want to say indoctrinated, but our parents have said, this is what we believe, this is what you should believe. And that is actually one of the big conflicts of this book and this series, is that we believe there's good guys and there's bad guys. And what Leo comes to discover over the course of the novel is that these definitions are not clear cut. Right? Everything is gray. Space pirates are not necessarily always bad. And the alien race that promises to protect you is not always good. And the alien race that they're protecting you from probably has a reason for doing what they do, whether you agree with that reason or not. And so what Leo then has to do, his journey, his personal journey, it's 2 parts. But the first part is he's got to discover for himself what he thinks is right and wrong, what's ethical or not, right? And the second part of his journey is he has to reconcile that with what's happened in his past. As Julie mentioned in the description, he lost his mother to this war between these alien factions. His father gets kidnapped. Like all of a sudden, not only is his like moral ground shaken, but his family's torn apart. So how do we find new families? Right? What do we make our new families of? How do we get the new family to help us find the old family? How do we get the old family to save the universe? Right? Oh, there's so much that we have to do. And so I took everything that I loved about science fiction. I added everything that I loved about middle grade fiction, right? Which is writing about young people as they're coming to this precipice of a new understanding of their world and their universe, and what kind of agency they might have in this world and universe, and how can they change it and make it a better place. And I mashed them together. And then, just for fun, I sprinkled in some environmental issues, right? So when you go to read the book, you will realize that there's this precious mineral called Ventasium, which is discovered in planets all across the universe. And of course, one place it's discovered is our wonderful world, Earth, right? And you can think of Ventasium as coal if you want, right? Whatever it is, it's like an energy source, but it's super rare, and it actually empowers like intergalactic travel. Okay, so this is how powerful this stuff is. Like you can just jump through the equivalents of wormholes and go planet hopping really easily with this stuff. You can imagine then what happens when somebody gets a hold of this, like how much power they have. And so I was thinking a lot about history, right? And like all of the civilizations that have had the technology. And what they've used that technology for, right? And you think about Europe in the age of sail, right? All of a sudden they had these big ships. What did they do with them? They went all across the world, and they decided to settle all these unsettled places where they could plant their flag and say, hey, you are now part of our country, even though that maybe the people there didn't want to be part of that country. And so there's a lot of that history of colonization and colonialism, I think, sifting through this, along with the fact that when you mine Ventasium, like terrible things happen. You strip the world of this resource. You strip the world of like trees and habitats for animals like that are becoming extinct as a result of this. And I'm like, you know what? This is nothing new. We've been doing that for hundreds of years, right? And so, I'm not going to say the novel's like preachy. I try to like undercut that with all the action, because don't get me wrong, ships explode, people shoot their blasters, there's cyborgs, right? And there's all kinds of things going on. But I think one of the greatest things about science fiction is its ability to create fantastic worlds and set them next to our world. And it's kind of like a fun shop mirror, right? Like a fun house mirror, where everything's a little bit distorted. But if you look at it close enough, you can be like, yeah, that's where we're at. Like these are the kinds of things that we're doing, even though this book is set, 50, 60 years in the future. Like this could be our future. I hope it isn't, but you never know. So yeah, I mean, that's just a little bit of the background about the kinds of things that went into the novel, right? It's a piece of Star Wars, and it's a piece of my growing up, and it's a piece of environmental catastrophe, and it's a piece of imperialism. But mostly, it was just a heck of a lot of fun to write, because there's nothing about writing about space pirates and creatures named Boo and Han Solo type roguish characters named Baz, right? And getting into their past and their nitty gritty. So like my first goal to anybody who's sitting down with Stowaway and its sequel Homebound is like, I want you to enjoy the romp. And then after that, if you want to stop and think about some of this other stuff, by all means.
That's excellent. Thank you. So, I have to admit that unfortunately, and I think it's due to my age, I'm not the biggest fan of Star Wars. When I was a kid, when they came out, they frightened me. Like there were elements of them. It's when they're on the snow planet with the big machines. Those scared me as a kid. Yeah. So I'm not. But I will ask you this, and then we'll go on. Did Han shoot first?
Absolutely.
Okay,
No,
that's all I wanted to
for
know.
sure.
I simply
No, I mean, I don't even know that that should be something that we have to question. I mean, it's ridiculous because number one, just the physics of it. Like, if you watch the re-release, where like Lucas corrected this mistake and has them shoot almost simultaneously, but just a split second, like he manages to dodge a laser bolt that is traveling at 400 miles an hour. He just like jerks his little head. He's like, "Phew, look at what I can do." Nobody can do that, right? Not even Han Solo. And Han Solo, like when I was a kid and I had to dress up as a Star Wars character, I was not going to be whiny Luke Skywalker, right? Forget that. I was always Han Solo.
yeah.
And nowadays I'm Darth Vader. Well, I don't know what that says about me. But yeah, so no, he totally shot first. And I think like if you're going to create this universe, right, which the cool thing about Star Wars is that it was nitty gritty,
Right.
and that was one of the important things about sort of the creation of all the models and the scenes is like this place is lived in, and these characters have a past, and that past informs upon what they do. And you know, Han Solo is a hunted man, like he's fighting for his life every second. So is he going to shoot first? Absolutely. In this
Right.
environment, in this world, in this universe that I've created, according to these rules, he definitely shoots first. But a good
Okay.
question.
I
Yeah,
mean, I just knew, I could tell based on your shirt and your passion that you would have an opinion on this. So I just
definitely
wanted
have an opinion.
everyone
I have an
to
opinion on all
know
of it.
you have opinions. So when you're writing something like this, did you intend for it to be a duology, or did you find that as you were writing, it was just more than one book could contain?
I always knew it was going to be more than one book. I didn't know if it was going to be two or three.
Mm.
And that sort of came down from the powers that be on high
Oh,
when I sort of pitched like what my vision of it would be. They're like, well, let's try it in two.
yeah.
So, I mean, I think I could have dragged it out to three for sure. But if you look at my body of work, I've published 14 novels now, and this is the only one that has a sequel.
Oh,
And
okay.
there's a reason for that. Like I
Yeah.
do not write series. I just want to jump on to the next thing. So when they said only two, I was kind of like all over that. And I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
let's get it done and move on and do something else that's fun and interesting. But I think when you have two, it does one really great thing. It lets you do the 1-2 punch, right? It lets you do
Mm.
all the setup and then you get the punchline. And so I could do all the world building in that first one, and then in the second one I could do all the payoff.
Yeah.
So, and whether or not it does pay off, I mean, that's up to the reader to decide. I don't think like you're never going to wrap everything up, certainly, which
Right.
is why you can have people who write 10 or 11 books. I mean, I'm still waiting on Game of Thrones book 7, is it? I don't know. Like I've been waiting on that thing for 20 years.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think sometimes it's good to just like get the kernel out there and move on to something else. So
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think duologies are something that I'm seeing more of, both in middle grade and YA, because there's been the uh trilogies have been the thing. But
yeah,
sometimes because you wanted the world build, a big arc, but sometimes, and I feel this way about Lord of the Rings, the middle one was annoying
right.
because it just was, they're walking. Anyway, um,
Yeah,
and I am more talking about the movie than anything, but
yeah,
I love a duology because you're right, you can set up a lot of what ifs in the first one and then do a really fun action in the second and kind of wrap it up. So when you're creating your characters, what's your like, how are you getting Leo and deciding, and again, what you're talking about with maybe all of the stories have been written where a parent dies, like this is the Lion King, this is Hamlet, this is right, we know that, but there is something to be said about a mother versus a father dying,
yeah.
or the character being male or female of the child, and then an older sibling. So what was your kind of intention with that family and how you created them?
Yeah. So number one, my default, and it doesn't always happen. I do have female protagonists, but whenever I sit down to write a book, I tend to write it for only one person, and that's me. And I tend to want to picture myself in the role of the protagonist. And I still identify as a boy. I'm a 12-year-old boy. So default is main character, 12 or 13-year-old boy, usually a little sarcastic, definitely out of his league, right? Fish out of water kind of thing, because that's the way I feel about my life most of the time. But in terms of like the family dynamic, having this family that is essentially, Leo and his brother and his father, and missing that mother dynamic. And so the reason why I kind of went with that is because the father is meant to represent in the book the sort of mind, the intellectual, right? The kind of like historical distance where he can look at everything because he's the scientist, right? From a logical point of view. And Leo doesn't always want to look at it that way, right? And his mother, while she was alive, provided, and I hate that this is sort of stereotypical, but it was, for like the way I envision this relationship, she provided more of the heart, right? And sometimes we just have to follow our gut. And the truth of the matter is, Leo's father is kind of blinded by the way he assumes the universe should work according to the laws that he knows. So I wanted Leo to be an amalgamation of those two, like to be pulled from both of those sides. But with his mother gone, like it's sort of up to him to take up that mantle and say to dad, like, this is actually what's important. These are actually the things that matter most. And he turns out that Leo has to fulfill that function for other characters in the book too, most notably Bastian Black, the pirate captain, who does not follow sort of the cold logic necessarily that his father does, but he just, he's like Han Solo, right? He's going to shoot first, and sort of goes on instinct based on his own past. So Leo shows him, how to think from his heart as well. So that was part of going into that family. As far as the other characters go, you have the great thing about writing in a genre like science fiction is that you have all these tropes that you can work with. And so, like I have to have this character and I have to have that character. So then how do I twist them and make them unique? Like, so what am I going to give my, salty female butt kicking warrior princess character, like what's going to be different about her? How do I give her an interesting past that motivates her to become the character that she became? I've got to have some kind of big fuzzy horn spouting, muscle bound 5-armed, 6-armed, 7-armed alien. Like, how do you decide how many arms your alien should have? Like, I don't know, like 4 seems logical, 3 would be kind of fun, but it's kind of weird just having one stick out of his chest or the top of his head. And so, but you're playing with those tropes, obviously, and you don't want them to be cliche. But at the same time, you want to be able to engender that familiarity in your reader, where they're like, yeah, I've kind of seen this dynamic before. I know what a roguish pirate captain should act like. So that when Baz doesn't act like that, which is rare, but sometimes he doesn't, it surprises you, right? And you're like, oh, that's fun. That was a neat little twist. And so getting those twists, that's part of what creates those characters for me, is how can I take the tropes of the genre of science fiction and play with them, right? And make them my own.
So, it sounds like there's a lot going on, right? We've got a lot. We've got mining, we've got aliens, we've got pirates. What made you decide to bring in that many things, though? Because from like the standpoint of maybe a Star Wars background, it's more about they are colonizing and taking over other people's, which gives them access to all the resources, but we're focusing on a really specific one. Like in this world, do they already know aliens exist? Like they've already, it's not scary. Like that's where I'm Like, because
Mhm.
if you just, you're 13 and all of a sudden aliens have invaded because of this one thing, like that would be so scary that maybe I wouldn't do anything else. I'd just be like, how do we stay away from the aliens? Like
Right, right, right.
we're in M. Night Shyamalan Signs instead of,
Yeah.
you know. So what, like, I guess let's start with that. They know aliens exist and have been visited before.
I mean, the way the novel is set up chronologically is that Leo has always known about the Ikari, who are the quote unquote colonizing alien force, right? So they're the ones that have the most access to the technology. They're the ones that are spreading throughout the universe. But the way they do it, man, they're tricky. They're tricky little Ikari because they come to your planet and they're like, hey, look at all this cool stuff we have. We have like intergalactic travel. We can cure cancer. We can build these awesome machines for you. And all you have to do is let us have access to this little rock that you don't even know how to use to begin with. Right.
Right.
And so we will hold your hand and we'll take you into the universe. Now, like the Empire, and Star Wars or anything else, right? It's just pure dark force, right? They're just
Right.
like, we want it, we'll take it. But that's not how you build allies, right? The way you build allies is you create a partnership. And the Ikari are smart. They know that this is the way to do it, right? This is the way to build a coalition. And that's literally what it's called, right? It's a coalition of planets. And the Ikari is the center of this coalition, but it's, presumably everybody still has a say and a voice in the matter. And that was super intentional on my part because we've seen too many movies where the aliens show up and the first thing they do is blow up
Right.
the Golden Gate Bridge and the White
The White
House,
House.
and like this is it, boom. But the movies that always interested me more were things like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right, by Spielberg, or like E.T. Again, another Spielberg. These things where we don't know for sure one way or another whether these guys are good or bad. Because when I sit back and I think about the prospect of intelligent life out there, and I'm assuming it exists, right? Because statistically, it seems like it would have to. Then, yeah, part of me goes to the instant fear, like, wow, if they're smart enough to get here, they're probably smart enough to blow us up. But then part of me wants to believe like there's benevolence out in the universe, right? And I think like if you're a human being and somebody comes down to your planet and they're like, hey, we're actually going to be nice to you. Like, what are you going to say? You're not going to say no. They've got all the power, but to share it. And then you stop and think about it, and you think about how that would have worked, like in our own historical past. And people showing up and saying, "Look, I have all these wonderful goods that you've never seen before. Just give me a little bit of land over here, right? And we can live in peace, until I bring you plague, or until I decide that it's not enough land and I need a little more land. So why don't you scoot over a little bit more or whatever?" And so, like, when I was talking about the novel, I was talking about the ambiguity. Like, I love ambiguity, and I think fiction is one of the greatest places to explore it. And I think middle grade fiction, especially, is a great place to explore it, because this is about the time when those gears in your little head are starting to turn and you're starting to question some of the things that you've always been told, right? All aliens are bad? No. All aliens are good? No. You got to decide it for yourself.
I think you're doing a great job too of redefining what a word can mean, because all of us have been aliens in some form, whether it's because we went to a new school. So there was a new middle school built when I was in sixth grade. So we all moved to that for seventh and eighth. And it felt again like I was starting, I'm an alien in a new land. And then we have a lot of rhetoric right now about people wanting to come to the US, and we're calling them aliens, except we've all been. So I really appreciate that, in that, we're showing kids too that words get used and misused, and we kind of need to acknowledge that people can change the meanings of certain things. I mean, same with, pirates and anything like that. I mean, there's such negative connotations, but they're were a need, or you know what I'm saying? I'm
Yeah,
even thinking of Guardians of the Galaxy, which I was late in watching, but I really do enjoy. But when what seems like a really mean guy helps save, people, it's like, oh, everybody still has a nugget of compassion
sure.
and humanity, if we'll call it that, hopefully in them. So I think that's great.
And
Did you
just
ever feel
to
like, oh, go ahead.
sorry, just to piggyback on what you said, because I think this is fascinating too, is that sort of centrist philosophy, right? Where, I mean, we all kind of believe we're the center of the universe, and everybody else is just kind of backdrop. Like the farther you go out, the more people just become extras in your little play.
Yeah.
And I think that works on like every level. Like it works on the personal level, but it also works on like a national level. From the United States. Therefore, guess what? I'm the most powerful country in the world, right? And so I must be the center of the world. And I think that's one of the things that like this book really throws into contrast is like Earth finds out really early on that they are not the center of the universe, right? They are not the
Yeah.
center of the galaxy. They are just another gas station on the great interstate of galactic conquest.
Yeah.
And we're just going to stop here and refuel, and hopefully you can be assimilated into the process. But if not, we've got violent solutions to that too. But yeah, so like everything that is not me is outside, and everything that is not me is alien to me. And
Right.
instinctually, I guess that makes sense, right? Like we need to be afraid of things that are strange and new to us because that's like how we survived as a species. But I also feel like we've evolved beyond that point, and that we cannot no longer let fear be the dominant impulse that guides our humanitarian behavior. And I still think even in 2023, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. Well, I would love to open it up to questions from our audience. We've got a couple people. If you've got a question and you want to ask it out loud, please feel free to use the raise hand function and we can unmute. If you would rather put it in the chat window, that's fine. We'll read it out loud for everybody. But I would really love to hear if you've already read the book, if you had a favorite part, you have a question about something that happened. We'll try not to do too many spoilers, but at the same time, we're hoping that people who are watching this later have already read the book, just they want more information about it. So yeah, feel free to ask questions now. If you're still pondering your question, I'm sure I can come up with another one. I do this often enough that I generally can just think of something to ask. Yeah, Jim, 1 second here. All right, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through Stowaway, and I haven't read any of your other books yet. So Riker, who's the other attendant, and I like to read. We both like science fiction, so we read books together sometimes.
That's awesome.
And it's really fun. But I was thinking I wanted to tag in on this last thing about the alien terminology and the fact that we're actually all aliens in some sense, or maybe nobody's an alien. I don't know. But and we think of ourselves as the center of the universe. When the Spaniards went to Mexico and were conquering the Aztecs, and they asked the Aztecs what this other neighboring group of people were called, what language they spoke to the south, and whoever they asked said Popaluca, and so they wrote that down. And even now, there's people who are called Southern Popaluca, Western Popaluca. And what the Spaniards didn't realize at the time is that Popaluca is the Aztec word for gibberish, because they spoke something else. They didn't speak Nahuatl, which was the Aztec language. They spoke gibberish. They spoke Popaluca. So it's that just kills me that this, we're the center of the universe. We're the important ones. That who cares about the rest of the world?
I mean, we all know that history is written, right, by the winners, quote unquote, whatever winning means, right? But essentially what that means is it's written by the people who have the power at the time to dictate. And like the fact that they even comes down to language, and the names of streets across this country. And you look at them, and how many of them are named after this guy or that old guy or something like that, and we're starting to question whether or not we should have these names, and how many names of like Native American places have been sort of adopted but then perverted, like got the spelling wrong or something like that, or wasn't even close to what they were actually calling it. And so, I mean, it's a great point. It's a great historical point. But I think the really cool thing is how we can use fiction, right? Like science fiction of all things, to get us to stop and reflexively think about this stuff. That's why as a genre, I just feel like it's so powerful, because it sneaks in the back door, right? The way that things like historical fiction don't. Like you read historical fiction about the conquering of the Aztecs, and it's going to be pretty blunt about what you're doing. But you read a science fiction about this race, conquering this planet with a strange name, and you're like, well, is that really what I think it is? So it's our capacity for metaphor and allegory, right? I mean, these are all great things that science fiction can do.
Yeah. Riker, did you have a question?
No, but I just wanted to say I'm about 3/4 of the way done with the book.
Nice.
They just arrived on the snow planet.
Okay. And are you enjoying it so far?
Yes.
Good. There's a nice balance of action and preachiness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Boo, the Quantetier, I think that's his name.
Yeah.
He, every time I imagine him, well, have you seen Boba Fett?
There's like the show. Yeah,
there's a Wookiee in it. He starts off kind of bad, but then he's kind of good. That's kind of what I imagine Boo to look like, just with 4 arms.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I won't lie. Obviously, the dynamic of Boo being part of that group, he's definitely got Chewbacca vibes, right? He's got some Wookiee vibes, and I think one of the interesting things about that dynamic is like Boo is the quote unquote alien, right? So he is the one who is not human. And in a way, like he's probably the most moral, ethical pirate among them. I pictured him more like a big lovable fuzzy dog. Like who do you go to when you need a hug? You go see Boo. But occasionally he'll break your arm if he has to, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah, occasionally.
Occasionally. If need be, I shall break an arm. But like he doesn't like carry a gun with him. Like that's not his thing. And it's funny because originally, if it was going to be a trilogy, I was going to get a lot more into his backstory and why he ends up doing what he does and becoming a pirate. And instead, what I ended up doing, if you go on to read Homebound, which I hope you do, is Boo gets his own trajectory, right? So though I don't get much into his past, I definitely give him his own road to travel, because I thought that was important, right? Because I think in a lot of ways he's kind of the soul of the group, and in a lot of ways also like he's the one that Leo gets attached to first, obviously. Like they become, theirs is a friendship, as opposed to his relationship with the other pirates, which is definitely more complicated.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite science fiction movie or novel?
I don't know. I really like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't really know if I understood the end. I think they blew up the planet with the people on it in the end. It's like some sort of time warp thing, and I didn't really like how it ended because it just like all the main characters just died.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't really like that.
No spoilers or anything. I mean, the good news is there's 5 books in this trilogy, right? And so you can find something that you love in Douglas Adams. I'll be perfectly honest. Like, I did not read Douglas Adams for the plot. I could care less actually what happened on a page by page basis. Yeah, I'm not sure it did. I just read it to see like what ridiculous thing was he going to think of next, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Zaphod Beeblebrox, right? The improbability drive.
Yeah.
Like, who thinks of this stuff? Like genius, right? Plus, I think it's hilarious. Like I like that kind of British humor, which is very dry that Douglas Adams has. I have read passages of Hitchhiker's Guide to my wife, and she's like, "Yeah, I don't get it." And I'm like, maybe you have to. You either love it or you hate it. I don't know. I'm a big
Yeah.
Monty Python fan too. So, what are you gonna do? But
I feel like your wife and I might have a little bit in common. I definitely did try to read Hitchhiker's Guide and I ended up putting it down because I was like, I don't get this. On the flip side, I do enjoy Monty Python, but I think it's more about the action and like maybe the cultural, like, commentary that it can lead to. Like I can walk up to certain friends and do this, and they know we're talking about a scene from Monty Python.
Yeah.
And there are certain books, but again, like you can't necessarily do that. But I think my thing, and I appreciate yours, is what it sounds like. I definitely still need to read it. Is I like straight science fiction without the fantasy that gets like you're still world building in here, but you're still building on something that we already know and acknowledge, right? Like we acknowledge that the earth exists, that there are minerals under it and all those things. When you get certain other things like even a little bit Game of Thrones, I'm like, who now, what now, and where did they come from? And like I hate to say it, maybe it's just me, I get confused.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, you can't figure out how crows fly so fast, right? I mean, this is your main method of communication, and somehow this crow manages to get from this castle all the way across the entire land, the continent, in 2 hours. So that we know exactly what's going on now. Giving them a hard time. Yeah, so I mean, one of the things is like there's science fiction, there's hardcore science fiction, and we're talking things like The Martian, right? If you've ever had a chance to read that book, where everything is based on, The Martian is such a great book, and a pretty good Matt Damon movie, if you'd rather do that. But I mean, it is hardcore science.
Yeah. I read Colony Mars series, which I heard is kind of like it.
Kind of like it, yeah. And then there's softcore science fiction, which maybe hopefully my book kind of flies into that, which is take some of the things that we know about the known universe, but let's face it, in order to have intergalactic travel, you've got to play with the laws of physics a little bit, right? And I decided not to try and explain it in any real depth, because I didn't understand it. I'm like reading treatises on wormholes and things like that, and I'm like, oh, this is just making my brain explode. So they just use the mineral, and the mineral makes the magic happen. And then you've got your pure up space opera, right? Which of course is what Star Wars is. And I wouldn't even call Star Wars science fiction. I mean, Star Wars is fantasy. It's fantasy with spaceships. But I love it all. I'll be honest. I can't write it all. I am not well versed enough in the science to write hardcore science fiction, so I never will. But I can get down on some fantasy set in outer space too if I have to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we will start to wrap things up. If we have any final questions, please pose them now. Otherwise, what I would love to ask you, Dave, is there anything we haven't covered about the book, about kind of, what inspired you or anything like that you just want to share with the readers of this, whether they're doing OBOB or not, just something that you want them to know about your book?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would share is it is a duology, right? So Stowaway sets up the world and it sets up the problems, and I feel like Stowaway is very much the wide scale. I mean, it's an expansion, right? And so I try to bring in history, and I try to bring in environmentalism, and I try to bring in some of these hefty, weighty issues. And then as I was writing Homebound, what I found that I was doing was I was bringing it closer and closer, right? And this actually works within the map, right? Because the goal of Homebound in the duology is like trying to just save the planet Earth, right? And so it's a condensing. It's an attempt to get back to this core thing that we know and we love and we want to protect. So if I could sort of leave readers of Stowaway and Homebound with anything, it would be to engage in both processes, right? To engage in the expansion of your mind, ask questions, to learn about new things, to not consider anything alien, right? But to welcome it, and at least like entertain the possibility that it might be good for you, right? And to sort of keep that open mind, but then take that new knowledge, that new awareness or whatever, and make it local again, like bring it back. Bring it back to your community, bring it back to your family, bring it back to the places where you actually have some agency, right? Because here's the deal. Leo and the space pirates cannot save the universe, right? But they might be able to save the planet Earth. You'll have to read the sequel to find out if that happens, right? And I feel like it's the same way with us. Like, we are not going to solve all the world's problems tomorrow, but if we can keep an open mind and expand our knowledge and be more welcoming, then we can take that back and we can change one smaller aspect of our world. And if everybody does that, you get that domino effect, and we make the place better, right? And so that was the movement I was trying to get with the 2 books, is the expansion and then the contraction and coming back home. So just never forget where you came from, right? Go out on your adventures, but while you're there, learn something and bring it back and share it with the people you love.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic, Dave. Thank you so much. That is just it's amazing sentiment all the way around, and to put that into book form is what every kid needs to read to start to, like you're saying, expand their mind. We love authors, we love readers. We appreciate so much you spending the time with us from Indianapolis. Our 2 guests tonight, thank you so much. If any of you make it down to Bend, Oregon, please stop into the bookstore and say hi to us.
I am in Bend.
You're in Bend
now. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
You better come by and say hi the next time you're on this side of town.
Okay.
Good. Well, thank you again for being here, everybody. Good luck in OBOB. Keep reading. And I see that Dave is wearing a sticker that says, I voted. Riker, I know you're too young, but let's pay attention to what's going on around us before maybe the aliens come, but also because, we need to take care of each other and ourselves and the world. And one of the ways we can do that is to vote. So I appreciate that there is an election going on today, and we have a really big one next year. So it's really good to find out what's going on around you. And with that, we'll say good night, and we'll get this posted up on YouTube as soon as possible. And I just wish everybody the best of luck with OBOB, and keep reading. It's the best thing you can do for yourself.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Good luck.
I'm gonna be an author when
I'm
writing